One of the biggest obstacles to learning any new complex system like a nonlinear editor, like Premiere Pro, is simply familiarity with the interface. And what you'll find is after a few days of just sitting with the application, the fact that your brain gets used to the colors and the shapes and the fonts that are used in the interface will actually make it easier and easier to learn the application. So don't worry if when you first start out, it just seems like really hard work. Your brain's busy registering those individual shapes and the patterns and the icons. All of that stuff has to be absorbed for you to be able to make sense of it. Let's just have a quick look at the main parts of the interface so we know what we're looking at as we work with Premiere Pro. First off, when you begin by starting up Premiere Pro, you're going to see here, I've got a list of recent projects I can choose from. I've got a new project button, an open project button, and a help button. I don't need to open one of my existing projects. I'm going to click on New Project, and I don't need to change any of the settings in this panel. I'm going to click Browse, and I'm going to, here we go, I'm going to find the location of my other projects. I'll put my new project file in there, and I'm going to give this a name. I'll call this an overview of the interface. Begin. I'll put a complete one in there as well when we're done. And I'm just going to click OK. I don't need to change any of the settings. This panel for making new sequences allows you to specify the settings for the edit that you're going to produce. So if you were working with DSLR media, you'd probably choose one of the DSLR options here. You'd normally choose your sequence settings based on what you shot more than what you want to output. Try to get the two to match what you shot and what you're editing, because it means less work for playback. And that means better performance for the system. In fact, I'm going to be super lazy here and cancel this panel. I'm going to make a sequence later on. Now, let's get some media in. This project panel is where I store items that I may or may not use in my edit. And I can just peruse things. I can just take a look at them without including them in the finished film. I'm going to double click. In fact, no, I'll do it a different way. I'm going to right click and choose Import. It has exactly the same effect. And here I'm going to pick some media. Why don't I take all this double identity media again? And click Open. I just lassoed that and selected it all together to import it. And here you can see I've got a lot of items on the list, and I've got lots of additional data. I can stretch this over and see all the metadata. In fact, I can see a lot more metadata if I want to. Now, if I'm going to import a file that's a complete file, like a QuickTime movie, I can do it in the way I just did. And if I select it, I get a thumbnail. If I double-click, I see it in my source monitor where I can play through things and make decisions about them. If I'm working with something like P2 or XDCAM or something like that, then I'm going to have what I would call a fragmented file system, a fragmented media type. And this is where the media browser comes in. The media browser is for browsing your content, your footage, directly on the hard drive. So this isn't in my project now. I'm looking, here's a P2 card contents. I'm looking at the contents of my hard drive. I haven't even imported this to my project. And again, I can double click and I can view things. And if I decide I want to use them, then I can drag and drop them into my project panel. In fact, I can drag them straight into my sequence if I like, and I'm going to automatically get a copy in my project panel. Maybe I'd better make a sequence first of all. I'm going to go to my project panel. I'm going to drag one of these shots onto the new item button. This button is actually a menu, and it lets you make a whole bunch of default items like black video and bars and tone. If I get this shot, where's that chair shot? If I drag this onto that button, Premiere Pro is automatically going to make a sequence that exactly matches my original media. So if you're not too familiar with media formats, I recommend you use that shortcut. Just drag and drop onto the new item button. You're going to get a sequence that matches. And now here you go, there on my timeline, I've got a clip and I can begin to build my sequence. This is your canvas, if you like. This is where you make your program. So if I select a clip, I get the controls for any effects that relate to that clip in the Effect Controls panel. You can only select one clip at a time. My audio mixer is for working on track-based effects and track-based audio adjustments. If you're familiar with the latch, touch, and write modes for riding the audio, here they all are. And it's important to be clear that anything you do in the audio mixer is for a track. Anything in the Effect Controls panel is for an individual clip. Here's a clip in my sequence. The metadata panel gives me metadata information about any clips that I select. This is either super important or, frankly, completely irrelevant. It depends on your workflow and your working environment. If you're working at a broadcaster, you are almost certainly going to be in and out of this panel as you work with the information associated with your media. If you're an end-to-end video editor, shooting, editing, and outputting, you may just never really need this. Metadata is information about the media, and depending on your workflow, it's invaluable or not that important at all. Up here, you can see I've got my program monitor, which shows me the contents of my sequence. This mini timeline here reflects, in fact, the timeline panel where my sequence is. You'll notice that this is almost exactly the same as the source monitor, and I can resize them different sizes, which is really cool. It's really, really useful. They are almost exactly the same, except that this panel on the left, the source panel, has options for putting clips into a sequence, and this panel over on the right, the program monitor, has buttons and controls for removing things from sequences. Let me just resize this a tiny bit. Over on the right, I've got my audio monitor, so as I play back,
Who's Guinevere?
I can see my level, and also, I don't know if I've got any audio on this clip. Yes, I do. I can monitor my source audio level as well. And here I've got a stack of tools, and if you're familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator or pretty much any design application from Adobe, you're going to be used to using different tools for different purposes. In the main, you're going to want this one, the selection tool. And if there's one keyboard shortcut I encourage you to learn, it's V. There it is in the tooltip. V for vertigo if you're in the RAF, or V for Victor if you're everybody else. That keyboard shortcut is going to get you out of a lot of fixes if you accidentally choose the wrong tool and then try to do something on the timeline and you get, what's going on? It's just wrong. Press V, and you're going to be back to normal operations. The info panel gives me information about things I click on, very useful. The effects panel has my list of effects, any item that I want to apply to my media. You'll notice I've got so many tabs along the top of this panel, I can't actually see all of them. And when that happens in Premiere Pro, you get a little navigator along the top here. Now I can see the other panels. The markers panel is for displaying information about markers. If I add one on the timeline, you can see I can add comments, I can change the duration. This is actually a very useful panel in this version of Premiere Pro. The history panel tells me things I've done and allows me to click back in time and undo. So I can see I've lost my timeline now because I just closed the sequence. There we go. I undid so many times I didn't even have a sequence anymore, and that closed the panel. You can go back in time here, and it's a very quick way of trying a before and after if you've taken multiple steps to make a change to your sequence. Those are the main parts of the interface. You'll find there are some extra panels under the window menu. There's also an option to create and update and reset workspaces, which is just a layout of multiple panels. And you've got under your standard menus here all the sorts of options you would expect. There's a lot of duplication, and that's a good thing. You'll find that there are options under the sequence menu, for example, that you'll also find as buttons and as keyboard shortcuts. And when you're first learning, that can be a little confusing because it seems like you think you've learned it one way and then somebody else does it another way. Just take my word for it. If you ever successfully get from A to B using Premiere Pro or any other software application for that matter, you have to be doing it right. It's just that, there are many paths up the mountain and each one of them gets you there one way or another. People have different preferences for how they like to work. Speaking of preferences, probably the last thing to show you is under the Edit menu. We've both got keyboard shortcuts, that's one option, and a separate list of preferences where I can go right the way through and change the way Premiere Pro functions. So that's an overview of the main parts of the interface in Adobe Premiere Pro CS6.